Every family has a story waiting to be discovered. Sometimes it begins with a photograph, sometimes with a name. Mine began with a candy shop in Brooklyn. I thought I was tracing the life of an ordinary Jewish immigrant woman. I had no idea that one small storefront would lead me into one of the most remarkable chapters of New York history. It looked like an ordinary storefront on an ordinary Brooklyn street, a candy stationery shop. But the shop was only the beginning. As I traced Lena's life through the records, the story expanded far beyond 489 Livonia Avenue, leading into Brooklyn's courts, police precincts, and eventually some of the city's most significant criminal investigations. Genealogy has taught me that ordinary lives are rarely as ordinary as they first appear. This is the story of one immigrant woman and the secrets beneath her candy shop. In 1903, 13-year-old Lena Frosch left Galicia in the Austrian Empire. Alone, she paid her own way. I often think about that crossing, a teenager traveling by herself, having saved the fare on her own, sailing towards a country she'd never even seen, with little more than hope and whatever she'd managed to put aside. Lena's new home was a tenement in the heart of the Lower East Side. The streets echoed with Yiddish, pushcarts crowded the sidewalks, families from across Eastern Europe packed into aging buildings, each carrying hopes that had crossed the Atlantic with them. It was noisy at times, crowded, overwhelming, and for Lena, it was where her American story first began. By 1905, Lena was reunited with her widowed mother and 3 siblings on Essex Street. Like many young Jewish immigrant women of her generation, she went to work in the garment industry, helping rebuild in New York the close family she'd left behind in Galicia. Every record pointed to the same conclusion. This was just a familiar story of an immigrant family building a new life. Genealogists, we spend years reconstructing a life from scattered records. Eventually, we think we figured someone out. This photograph was that moment for me. By the early 1920s, Lena had what so many immigrants came to New York seeking: a husband, 3 children, a business, a home. Her story felt pretty complete. This photograph matched the picture I'd built of Lena perfectly. But then the records began telling a very different story. I wasn't reading census pages anymore. I was reading court calendars, prison records, newspaper clippings. The first article kind of caught me off guard. It wasn't about her family, it was about bail bonds. The woman I thought I understood was also one of the few professional bondsmen in New York City at this time. Lena's bail bond work went far beyond writing bonds. She operated under at least 3 different names, pledged the same family properties as collateral on multiple bonds at once, and paid precinct officers to steer business her way. This wasn't the business of posting bail. It was the business of illegally manipulating the justice system for profit. By the mid-1930s, that business had drawn the attention of investigators. Brooklyn's Liberty Avenue precinct sat at the center of a much larger scheme. Bondsmen, patrolmen, and court officers all working the same racket. Assistant Attorney General John Harlan Amon set out to dismantle it, one insider at a time. Lena was blacklisted by the bonding industry and arrested again. At first, I thought I was watching one bondsman's downfall. But the deeper I read, the less this looked like one woman's story. It was more like an exposure of an entire system. One place kept surfacing in the records: White Lake, New York. In my family, White Lake was cousins' camp. Modest cottages, kids running between cabins, summer evenings by the water, one of the happiest places in our family memory. Then it surfaced in a very different kind of record. Law enforcement files, newspaper accounts, the same quiet resort area in Sullivan County, described as a place where Brooklyn's underworld disposed of bodies, held meetings, and disappeared for a while. I sat with that contradiction for a long time, trying to reconcile my family's Catskills getaway with these grisly stories. For weeks, I felt like I was chasing 3 stories that refused to stay separate: a bail bond scandal, a police corruption case, and now, somehow, Brooklyn's underworld. They kept leading back to the same names, the same precincts, the same files. Every time I thought I understood the shape of it, another thread pulled loose. Then I stopped reading the records one at a time and built a timeline instead. That's when it resolved. These weren't 3 different stories. They were one story viewed from 3 angles: the bail bond business, the police graft network, and Murder Incorporated, overlapping in a single place. And sitting in the middle of that overlap was Lena. The records weren't just showing that Lena knew these men. They were revealing the role she played in their world. Newspapers described her as the fixer for Murder, Inc., the person who people turned to when arrest had to be managed, bails arranged, problems made to disappear. She hadn't merely crossed paths with organized crime. She had become part of the machinery that kept it running. By now, I understood I wasn't looking at one investigation, but 2, approaching the same underworld from different directions. Eamon was unraveling the bail bond and police graft racket. At the same time, Brooklyn District Attorney William O'Dwyer was working backward through hundreds of unsolved murders in Brooklyn, an investigation that would ultimately expose and take down Murder, Inc. 2 investigations, 1 underworld, and Lena stood at the point where they met. Lena was convicted for her role in the Brooklyn bail bond racket and began serving her sentence. Then the investigation changed. Prosecutors needed an insider, and Lena knew the system from the inside. She became a state's witness, helping expose the very network she had once worked within. It was a dangerous decision. Others who cooperated didn't always survive, but Lena did. Her sentence was reduced, and she walked free. How she survived remains one of the questions still driving this research. This photograph was taken just a few years after it all ended. Looking at it, you'd never guess what Lena had lived through. The newspaper headlines had faded. The court proceedings were over. Within the family, silence had taken their place. Yet here she stands beside her family, looking as she always had. I could never look at this photograph the same way again. Lives are rarely as simple as the memories that survive them. Sometimes it takes every record, every clue, and every unanswered question before we can finally see them clearly. The records didn't give me a new Lena. They gave me a deeper understanding of the one who we all had always been there. I used to think of a photograph was proof of who someone was. Now I think it's just where the story starts.